In this video we're talking about APIs, what it is, how to use them and where to find them. In this video we're just talking about them, but in the next video we're going to build our own web API. So let's get started. Here's the definition. An application programming interface is a way for two or more computer programs to communicate with each other. Most often when we talk about APIs, we talk about web APIs, and that's what we're going to discuss in this video. And web APIs are computer programs that communicate with each other via internet. On this slide you can see a typical setup. I'm using my desktop and I'm opening a browser and I'm going to a shopping website. There I have to log in. I put my login, I put my password and I press login. My request is being sent to the web API application that is sitting somewhere on a remote server. I'm accessing that web API by this address, shopping.com/API/login, and in the body of the request I'm sending my login and my password. Web API receives my application and it sends it to the database. The database will check if my login and password exist, and if it does, it's going to return a user ID that belongs to me. After that, web API will use my user ID and will send another request to the database and ask to get all the information about me as a user. When the data is received, web API will send the data back to the browser and I'll be able to see the page with, let's say, the history of all my shopping orders. This is just the general principle, and it can vary from application to application, from API to API. Web APIs became very popular because they don't communicate just with one type of device. They can communicate with all kinds of devices, and it can happen all at the same time. And you can see here we have an iPhone, Android, and they're both mobile phones, but I put them separate because they have different operating systems, and usually you have to have two separate applications running on them. We also have here our web browser and also desk application, and on the left side we have so-called IoT devices. IoT stands for Internet of Things, and it can be any device that has an IP address. In this example, we are looking at the web camera. This camera has an IP address that connects to your router, and all videos are being loaded via web API to the database. Once the data in the database, it can be accessible from all other devices we are using: iPhone, Android, web or desktop applications. Let's talk about different types of APIs by access. So the very first category are open APIs. They call open APIs because anybody can use it. I put conditions applied because some of the APIs are completely free, some APIs are paid, and some APIs are hybrids. So let's say you get 1000 API calls a day for free, and if you go over that limit you have to pay. Partner APIs, also called B2B, business to business APIs, are used to exchange information between different companies or different agencies. For example, a federal agency and a state agency, let's say crime labs, they can exchange information about crimes committed at the federal or at the state level. Of course, those agencies would have to agree on protocols and what kind of data they're going to exchange, and of course to agree on the type of authentication they're going to use. Internal APIs are used internally within the business. For example, a big company has an API sitting on their server, and multiple applications of the same business are accessing that APIs to exchange data between them. And composite APIs is a combination of all the above. So what kind of data are you getting from those web APIs when you request the data? These are some of the formats that are used for that data, and JSON is the most popular nowadays. In the past, XML, extensible markup language, was very popular, and there are still multiple legacy applications using this format. Number 3, 4, and 5 are not as popular, and I just listed it just to show you the examples of other ways you can get the data from the web API. So this is the example of the same data but represented in different formats. So on the left side you can see it's a JSON, and this format is used in JavaScript to represent objects. The starting curly brace indicates that it's an object, and as you can see inside that big object we have two properties, results and info. The results property is an array, and inside that array we have one object. Property gender has just one value, female, and property name is represented as another object with three more properties, title, first and last. So we have multiple arrays and objects nested within other objects and arrays. Next is XML format, and all properties are displayed as tags. There's an opening tag and there's a closing tag. So for gender, we have an opening gender tag and closing gender tag, and inside those two tags, we have a value female. So three first formats are human readable, and the last one is a binary format, so it's readable by machines, but it's not readable by humans. Web API protocols, why do we need them? If two programs are communicating with each other and exchange information between each other, we need to have certain rules about how this is all going to be happening. Here I'm listing just a few protocols, the most popular protocols, and the REST protocol is the most popular nowadays. SOAP protocol is an older protocol and it's not being used very much when you build a new application, but there are a lot of legacy applications that are using this protocol. And the last protocol that I'm listing here is GraphQL. It's a relatively new protocol, but it's increasingly gaining its popularity these days. This is just the example of a few REST verbs that are being used when applications communicate with each other. Get, put, delete, and post verbs are the most popular verbs, but there are other ones too. Now let's talk about open APIs, and we're gonna look at this list of 1425 web APIs, and they're broken down into 51 categories. I'm gonna put this link in the description of this video, and we'll go to that link in a second, but before we do it, I want to talk about what kind of information we have in those tables. So in the first column, we have a link to the website where we can find documentation for that web API. In the second column, we have a short description of what that web API does. Authentication type, it's telling you if you can just request information and receive it right away, or you need to go to the website and open an account. And usually a unique API key will be generated for you, and with every request you are sending to that web API, you will have to send that API key. The next column is HTTPS column, and nowadays most of the APIs are HTTPS, and S stands for secure. So it's a secured HTTP protocol, and what it means, the data that is going between one application and another application is going to be encrypted. CORS stands for cross-origin resource sharing, and to explain it I actually have a separate slide. So if you have a so-called CORS policy, you have to open an account and you have to generate an API key, and then you configure your web API account to allow only requests from certain sources. For example, if my application is sitting on a server and the address of my application is www.mysite.com/API, only requests that are coming from that web address will be allowed to be processed and get the data back. Of course, you can configure multiple sources, so your web API can not just get requests from one source, but it can be multiple sources. Let's now look at the list of open APIs. If you go to this URL and scroll down, you will get to the index part where all APIs are divided into different categories. You can keep scrolling to look at those categories, or you can just click on those links and go directly to that category. Let's look at one of them as an example. I'm gonna click on this test data category, and I'm gonna click on this random user link. So from here I'm gonna click on documentation, and I'm gonna click on how to use, and I'm gonna scroll down. I'm gonna copy this link and I'm gonna go to different tab. As you can see, I already used it, so I'm gonna just place it again here, Control V. And instead of getting 5,000 random users, I'm gonna just remove it and put number 2. When I press enter, I'm gonna get a result in a JSON format. This is hard to read, so I'm gonna go back to our documentation. And here in documentation, I can find different formats, and instead of looking at the default format JSON, I'm gonna grab this pretty JSON format, Control C, I'm gonna go back, and here I'm gonna add one more parameter. I'm gonna put ampersand and type format equals pretty JSON. So I'm gonna press enter, and you can see the same data but just differently formatted. Let me go back and let me use XML. Same thing, I'm gonna replace pretty JSON with XML. As you can see now, the data is coming to me in the XML format. This is just general information about Web APIs, and in the next video we're gonna build our own Web API using C# and .NET framework. I hope it was helpful, and thank you for watching.